From the moment they hung the painting in the living room, something felt wrong. They had found it in the attic of their new home in Egypt, a dusty, framed portrait of an ancient scene. Pyramids looming under a darkened sky, with shadowy figures in robes standing before them. Some looked like priests, others like mysterious beings wrapped in smoke. Despite its eerie look, Mr. and Mrs. Howard decided it gave their home a touch of authentic Egyptian charm and hung it on the wall with a shrug. But 11-year-old Emma felt otherwise. "Why are their eyes like that?" she asked, pointing to the tiny faces in the painting. The eyes looked back at her, dark and hollow. "They're just old," her mom said, laughing. "It's all in your head." That night, as Emma lay in bed, she felt uneasy, like something was watching her. The house was silent, her parents' soft voices barely audible from down the hall. But soon, a strange feeling filled the air, a creeping sense of being observed. She rolled over, telling herself she was just tired, and drifted into a restless sleep. At 3 a.m., a soft thud woke her. She sat up, blinking in the dark. There it was again, a faint knock, echoing through the walls. Emma slid out of bed, tiptoeing down the hall to the living room, where the strange painting hung. In the dim light, she stared, her heart pounding. The figures seemed closer. Their faces were sharper, clearer than before. She noticed a man near the painting's edge, his outstretched hand now reaching toward the frame, as if he were trying to step out. Emma raced back to her room, her heart thundering. She tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light. Just a dream, she thought, as she finally fell asleep. In the morning, Emma hesitantly mentioned the painting to her parents. "You're overthinking it," her dad said, ruffling her hair. "Paintings don't move." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling, and that night, her curiosity pulled her back to the living room. She turned on a small lamp and stared at the painting, trying to spot any changes. Her eyes traced the eerie figures in robes and smoke. And there it was, a new detail that hadn't been there before. A faint, shadowy figure was now peeking out from behind a priest, barely visible in the background. She leaned closer. The shadow's face was expressionless, but it radiated a strange, almost menacing energy. Emma backed away, bumping into the couch, her skin prickling with fear. Days passed, and each night, the painting's figures seemed to shift a little more, each step pulling them closer to the painting's edge. Emma became more afraid to look, but every time she saw it, it seemed like they had moved. She wasn't the only one noticing strange things. Mrs. Howard found herself drawn to the painting, her eyes often lingering on it for minutes at a time, lost in thought. One evening, Emma's father found her mother staring at the painting with a distant look in her eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked, breaking her out of her trance. Her mom blinked, looking confused. "Oh, yes. Just thinking." But Emma saw a new shadow in her mother's gaze. That night, Emma was woken again by a soft whisper. She crept down the hallway, her heart pounding as she neared the living room. The air was thick, and the shadows seemed to press in closer. There, standing directly in front of the painting, was her mother, staring at it, her eyes wide and unfocused. She was whispering something Emma couldn't make out, her voice low and strange. Emma felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Mom?" she whispered, taking a step closer. Her mother's head jerked up, her eyes blank for a moment before she blinked, coming back to herself. She looked around, disoriented. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "You were talking to the painting," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Her mother shook her head. "Go back to bed. It's nothing." But Emma could see the unease in her mother's eyes. The next morning, Emma begged her dad to get rid of the painting. "It's just a painting, Emma," he insisted, but she saw his hesitation. However, he agreed to cover it with a sheet, hoping it would ease her fears. That night, they left it shrouded, thinking it would put an end to the strange events. But as the clock struck midnight, a loud ripping sound echoed down the hallway. Emma's eyes shot open, her heart pounding. She stumbled down the hall, her parents following close behind. The sheet covering the painting was on the floor, torn in two, as if someone, or something, had ripped it off. The figures were closer now, their faces twisted with eerie smiles. The shadowy man had nearly reached the edge of the frame, his hand fully visible, as if he were preparing to step out. Her mother's face went pale. "How is this happening?" Emma's father swallowed hard, his voice unsteady. Maybe it's time to get rid of it." The next day, they took the painting out to the yard, digging a hole in the sandy ground behind the house. Together, they buried it, hoping to bury the strange events along with it. They returned to the house, relieved to be free of the unsettling presence. But that night, Emma's dreams were filled with dark shadows and whispers, voices calling her back to the painting, urging her to look again. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. She tried to brush it off as a nightmare, but a gnawing fear lingered. A week later, Emma's father noticed something strange in the living room, a faint outline on the wall in the exact spot where the painting had hung. And each day, the outline grew clearer, the shapes of the robed figures slowly reappearing, as if trying to force their way back into the house. Emma's parents decided it was time to leave the house. They packed quickly, eager to escape the eerie feeling that had haunted them for days. But as they prepared to leave, Emma saw it. A single, dark figure standing at the edge of the yard, watching them with hollow eyes. They never looked back, driving away into the night, hoping to escape the shadows that had crept into their lives. But as they reached the outskirts of Cairo, Emma glanced back, just once, to see the shadow still standing by the road, watching. And in that moment, she knew. Some things could never be buried, not really. The shadows of the past had a way of following you, no matter how far you ran. And as the darkness fades, remember, the real chills linger long after the story's end. Until next time, brave souls.